Good morning, everybody, or almost good afternoon. I think the Minister has left, right? But dear Minister for Research and Education, François, the Ministry of Economy, it's a great honor, colleagues, friends, for me to represent here today the European Commission. The governmental interest, the take-up of Luxembourg, the announcement of the OSPO today, I think it's great news. It shows the increasing awareness of governments of the relevance of open source for their countries, of the relevance of open source for the future of Europe. And so I would like to thank you and the LibreOffice conference organizers, the university, for giving me the floor for a few minutes to give you a highlight of how our journey is very similar to the journey of Luxembourg. I'm sure that the road that I'm going to... How do I do this? Where's my... Page down. That my journey, the journey of the European Commission on open source is similar to the journey of many of the organizations, public services that are maybe today in this room. Of course, we know that there are many reasons to use open source, but I discern... And let me just list a few, right? You have cost savings, there is interoperability, increased flexibility, we have avoiding IT vendor lock-in. I discern from working at the European Commission's OSPO two key motives. It's a bottom-up process. This is what you see in this diagram, because we started using open source when it was on nobody's radar, because the techies in the Commission started using it. Our first examples of open source are 1993, 1994, when the researchers at the JRC in Italy started collaborating with the European Space Agency researchers and the researchers at NASA to try and find a way to share the geographic information coming from satellite data on vegetation and sea level temperatures. It's just very early climate change research that they were doing. And this project resulted in what is now Apache as a web server and many other projects. A few years later, Commission colleagues in the data center started playing with Linux, primarily to find out if it was a good way to replace all the other Unixes in the data center. And so they created a LAMP stack to run a wiki so that they could write notes to all the colleagues. This is what we're doing, this is where it is, these are the passwords, this is where you find things, this is how you stop and how you start things. And in 2003, I think, we had our first external open database also running on LAMP, where we, for one of our agencies, the Agriculture Agency, I think, on pesticides. And so it just kept growing from that point on, and so now you find it everywhere. The first websites of the Commission, also in 1995, I think, started running on open source, and now you find we have applications on the desktop, we have developers sharing open source, we have a European Union public license, and we have really grown and become more mature in this use and producing and contributing. There is a second reason for the Commission and for other public services to gravitate towards open source, because it fits to the values of European public services. We are making it very easy for others, mostly other public services, to reuse our solutions. We share our software in order to work together with mostly other public services on better interoperable surfaces. And we make our software available because it allows you as citizens to study the things we do, and that increases trust, or at least that's one of our goals. And so we looked around the other day, just a few weeks ago, on our code repositories to see, looking for curl, because we had Daniel Stenberg talking to us. And we noticed that, like, hundreds of Commission projects use curl. It's actually so much that we don't have the right number, because we ran it on the files that we could access, and we realized this is only a part of the files we can see. So there's many users of curl, and we were very happy to share that with Daniel. I'll give you a few more examples of how we use it. We have over 301 Commission websites. They're all running Drupal. And I think We told you already the majority of our services in the data center now run Linux. It's about 70%. And most of the building blocks of the Digital Europe program are available as open source. You might not have heard of the Digital Europe program, but fair chance you're already using them. All the companies that do import and export declarations are using open source developed by the European Commission, a library somewhere. Many of you who interact with internet with digital signatures will be using software that was originally developed and shared as open source by the Commission. All of the programs funded through the Interoperable Europe program are made available as open source. And just two examples, EU Survey, a tool that we use a lot to organize our surveys with. You might have interacted with us and thanked us for us. And a toolbox to create legislative text called LEOS, which is slowly finding traction in the member states. So it's an example of working together on a common component. And on our desktops and on our laptops, you will find a whole range of things. So we have Firefox, we have AdBlocker, uBlock Origin, Media Player VLC, of course, and LibreOffice. Michael, I think I asked you the other day, and I told you what the latest version. I think we run one version or two versions behind what is out there at the moment. And it's available as a virtual application for the users that want to use it. And the list of commission services who are involved in open source is very, very, very long. I already mentioned the Joint Research Center, the ones that were doing the climate research. But we have Eurostat as one of our other champions. They have started contributing to open source somewhere in 2011, have been going ever since. They actually helped us break a bit of the barriers, which I will address in a few seconds. Let's move on, because you've been looking at this screen for quite a while. So around 2018, the Commission realized it had to organize a few things in order to make it much easier for open source. And that resulted in 2020 in a publicly announced open source strategy. We had several other strategies, but they were internal. And the open source strategy for 2020-2023 was announced publicly. And it set us out on a journey. It created an OSPO, and it made the OSPO responsible for these actions you see there. I will not dwell there too long. We are part of the Interoperability Unit. The OSPO was part of the European Unit, and they run the Interoperable Europe platform, which is also a place where you can find a lot of information on reusable solutions. And we realized that open source is a key element to this thing, which is why we are there. The same unit created the European Union Public License, which is kind of a fork of the GPL, available in 27 languages, and it's adapted to European copyright. And so, having an OSPO, one of the things that happened to us is that other similar organizations started contacting us because they wanted to know what we were doing. They wanted to start exchange of best practices. So on the top right, you see what we now know as the EU OSPO network, where we have the Luxembourg House of Cybersecurity as the most recent entry. We're very happy to have this exchange. It's with 13 OSPOs in 8 member states, and it includes CERN. And we are trying to find a way to align our best practices, to agree on, okay, so this is how we should run our repositories. This is how we should not make it more difficult with new contributing license agreements and so on. These are the kind of things we try to discuss and find ways to collaborate on reuse of our tools. Bear with me as I switch. There's so much I have to write it down, otherwise I forget half the anecdotes. And so our growing involvement is why the current strategy for open source gives us room on both the bottom-up process and the top-down process, the European Union goal. So we had to make it easier for our developers to share open source. We had to make it easier for our developers to ingest open source. And now the result is we've made a few changes on our internal repositories. If people create a project, it will now be accessible to all the developers who have access to this internal development network. Unless they have good reasons to close it. But the cut was made in 2021, and we monitor the projects that are, say, internally closed and internally open, and 97% of all new projects are open. Developers are happy to share with our colleagues inside. And I think this is a hint, I'm giving it to you, because this is where we're thinking we should go next. We should go and take this one step further, but I can't reveal too much. But we want to take that one step further. We also needed to make it a lot easier to share software externally. And this has been successful. We wanted a substantial reduction in the time for the paperwork. I will give you an example from a while ago, because this is the bad example. We hired a core developer of Securitata, a core security tool, in order for him to develop on the Commission's behalf 4 features that we wanted to contribute. He did this, the code was there, and by the time we had the paperwork ready to make it available, clearing it with the IP unit, making the copyright, etc., deciding on the license, the contract had gone, it was expired, the developer was done, he had left for other better jobs, and the community had made other solutions for those 4 problems. So we published it, but it was basically a waste of everybody's time. And this forced us to say, okay, this has to change. And I already said Eurostat was one of those organizations that helped us in overcoming this barrier, because they looked at this process. It's not going to work. I don't have people to go and fill in signatures and fill in paperwork and chase signatures. I'll just publish it as open source. I will not contact the IP unit. I'll just do it. And the IP unit understood that, because this was in line with what they would actually prefer to do. So with the open source strategy, the OSPO was tasked to change this thing. And so we worked with the IP unit to create it's the next slide, commission decision, a change in the household rules of the Commission. It took us, this is always the hard part in an administration, to get the paperwork to change the thing, to make it easier for the next thing. I have another example of that later. But so we have a Commission decision that makes dissemination of software, the default is now open source. If you want to not share it as open source, you have to ask everybody for permission, and it will take months, and nobody does that. So the outcome is that we have a code sharing repository, and it's like the amount of projects we receive is above our expectations. There is a slide on that. Did I pass it? Because I can't see the slide. Yeah, it's this one. The sharing of code externally. So we have 4,000 users now. Sorry, 3,000 users now, and there's close to 700 projects, which is literally a lot faster and a lot more than we expected. Which is also interesting because the disk space that we procured was not big enough immediately. So that was an interesting test. The slides are on the barriers, are on the lab, so I want to talk 2 more seconds on the legal barriers thing. So we had because it's interesting for other member states. The default way for disseminating software is now open source. And this same decision makes it very easy, legally, for Commission developers to contribute to upstream projects. They don't have to do anything, they can just commit to the project that they're working on. The only thing that happens now is that we need our developers, we have some 6,000 developers working at any one time for the Commission to actually start doing this. And that's another challenge for the future. But the next thing we did is we needed a way for our Commission services to experiment with open source tools that they would find interesting and find a process to get it on board in the machine. This is very complicated. This is the other example of how it's always the paperwork and getting the process changed. Once that's in place, the colleagues who want to do open source will find a way to make it work for their units. And so we have a process. Of course, it's easy to create a virtual machine and give people access and let them install things and play with it. The problem is your manager on board? Is there budget? Do we agree with the governance unit and the security unit that this will be a test for a year, and after the test, how do we evaluate it? And if the evaluation and the tests are both successful, will we make it a permanent service to the rest of the Commission? That's the hard part. But we have this in place, and we are getting a lot of tips and requests for services. These are just a few examples. There's a lot more out there. So it's a nice way to try and grow the number of open source applications that we make available to the Commission. We do also an enormous amount of outreach. This caught us a little bit by surprise as well. It's close to a quarter to a third of our time dealing with communities of open source developers, with questions that we get. There's basically two things that I really would like to talk about here. So we've organized a lot of external and internal events. The list is on the screen. But the hard part is to change again the process. So now we have a procurement framework in place that allows us at any time to organize a bug bounty. So we have a unit, they have a tool. It's an open source tool. They want to improve it or test it. They can allocate some budget, use our bug bounty framework, go to one of the pre-selected bug bounty service providers and have it organized. Makes it a lot easier for Commission services to do these kind of things. Previously it was impossible, they had to talk to everybody. Now we have an OSPO, one of my OSPO colleagues worked on this for 2 years, chasing signatures, getting approval, putting it in place. And I'm saying it's in place, but it's almost in place. We're close. But it's much more difficult to organize that than to organize what we've also done, 2 internal hackathons to bring 50 of our internal teams together. That's the picture that is shown on the bottom right. Where you have the developers who are enthusiastically looking at their old code to find out where did we put our passwords and where did we put our internal IP addresses, because they need to go to our vault. This is one of the barriers we have with sharing. A lot of our projects, thousands of them, were never designed to be shared because they were not set up like that. So people did things that we shouldn't do, like say the password is hard-coded or internal server is hard-coded. This stuff shouldn't be shared not only internally, but internally is just one step to going outside of the Commission. So it just needs to go out of the code. And no team has time for that. So we organized several bug bounties to force people to have time to do it. Very successful. It helps us really to drive the internal message of open source. But those are much easier to organize than the bug bounty framework, which will have longer consequences. One of the other things we spent quite a bit of time arguing and discussing and then finally organizing is that our governance process, the one where people submit ideas for new projects. Now we ask everybody, did you look for open source alternatives? If you are using open source, are you also considering software development? If you're doing software development, are you going to contribute your software as open source? And please do get in touch. The main goal here for us is to get in touch with these projects early on so we can tell them, we have code.your.eu. If you want to do this, do it like this, don't do it like that. Make it easier for others to contribute, but design that from the start. And so we get some impacts, and they're on the screen. You all know you need to design, you need to know open source is your goal. That means you need to code in the open. Don't do it afterwards because it's not possible. You have all this stuff in there that you didn't want in there. It was never written to be understood by other developers. And you will never get the community that way either. This is also, I think, where we as OSPO now realize that we need to work on the next level, namely how do we really become a part of the open source community. Because it's easy for us to do code.your.eu and share our code there, but that's not the same as getting in close development collaboration with developers. That's for the next version of the strategy, possibly. This is a big project for us. We work with the European Parliament, has always been super interested in open source, as you all know. And like Francois, you had your trigger with the I Love You virus. The European Parliament and the Commission had a similar trigger with the Heartbleed bug that made everybody aware that we have a problem there. And the European Parliament has forced the Commission to finance several projects that ended up being part of the OSPO work. And this FOSSET project is one of them. And here we have gotten a mandate from the Parliament and quite a bit of money to organize that there is a way for all of the member states to start to make it easier for them to share the open source solution that we have. If you would go around Europe and you would collect examples, you would probably find that we have the whole stack covered. Everything a public service does, we will find an open source solution for it that could do it. Except it's written in France, it works in Italy, or it works in Germany, or in Sweden, or in Denmark. And it's not this idea of having it cross-border is really the hard part. But let's start by making them available. Let's start by making them easy to find. That's what we attempt with this, with the catalog. We are now, what is also nice is where we're proving that reuse is doable, because we're using the Italian catalog software, which is open source, to build a, say, European Commission version of it, which will go to the Interoperable Europe platform, and it will collect data from all the other catalogs in the member states. Not all member states have a catalog, so that's something we might also be addressed. Help them set up a catalog. We now have a reusable tool for it, and work with everybody. The OSPOs, some of them are in the room, to find an easy way to exchange this kind of information. And as part of that process, we will explore other ways to pool resources. That's also what FOSSEPS is aiming to do, to get public services to work together, to find ways to, for example, address needs that they see in their open source tools, or security issues that they see in their open source tools, and then say, okay, here's 50K for me, you guys have 100K, that's already 150, we'll double it as commission, and then we can actually do some serious things. Well, with 3K maybe not, but that's just a number. Few more sentences. So with the adoption of the Interoperable Europe Act, as well as many other policies that have come out recently, including the Cyber Resilience Act and the Product Liability Act and the AI Act, and now that we were going to have a commissioner who is responsible for technological sovereignty, it's really the right moment to revamp the European Commission's open source strategy. I know I stand here as one of the guys at the OSPO, but I know the Commission is really ready to further embrace open source and to find a way to become a collaborative public service. We can talk about it. I, as OSPO, would really like your ideas. We would welcome your ideas on how to get going and how to make this work and where to go. One thing is for sure, the Commission will increasingly share its software as open source, and it really has a future with us. So, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.